Throughout the entirety of The Lord of the Rings, only a handful of characters on the side of good are ever killed, with the survival of most of our main characters being seemingly guaranteed from the beginning. There is, however, one exception to this. In this video, we'll explore the life and most importantly death of Théoden, as well as examine the deeper implication of his story on the wider philosophy of The Lord of the Rings. Before examining his death, however, let us first see his life. Théoden was born as the son of Thengel, the then crown prince and future 16th king of Rohan, and his Gondorian wife Morwen Steelsheen. Thengel had fallen out with Théoden's grandfather, the king Thengel, an event which made him move to Gondor, where he met his wife and started a family, with Théoden spending much of his early childhood in the southern kingdom of the Dúnedain. Théoden was one of 5 children, but as his father's only son, he was destined from a young age to eventually ascend to the throne of Rohan. In 2953, when he was only 5 years old, his grandfather Thengel died, making him crown prince and forcing his father, the new king, to return to the Riddermark and lead the kingdom. Having spent so much time in Gondor, his family had been deeply immersed in the culture of the men of the West, speaking Westron and learning Sindarin, the language of the elves, traits that passed down to the young Théoden. While still the crown prince, he married Elfhild, with whom he was unfortunately widowed young, as she passed away in the year 2978 as a result of childbirth, while giving birth to the couple's only child and heir, Theodred. Only 2 years following the death of his wife, his father also passed away, which made Théoden the 17th king of Rohan at just the age of 32. For the majority of his reign, and especially in its early years, despite any challenges that would occasionally arise, the kingdom experienced a period of relative peace and stability, at a time of increasing darkness throughout the world. He developed a deep bond with his people, and grew to be greatly respected by his peers. Nonetheless, Théoden must have felt increasingly alone without what would have been his queen, and his love for his son and heir was deep, the only part of her left and the future of the realm. By the year 3014, however, after over 30 years on the throne, his health started to drastically decline. His beloved sister Théodwen had already passed away by this time as a result of illness following the death of her husband in battle over a decade prior, and he took under his wing her beloved children Éomer and Éowyn, raising them as his own. As the years passed, his condition, likely caused by the sorcery of the turncoat Saruman and the influence of Grima, deteriorated, and the king fell more and more. With his severe physical and mental decline, Wormtongue grew in strength, and the kingdom was overcome by darkness and deceit. By the time of the War of the Ring, Rohan was surrounded from all sides by orcs and downlanding incursions, as well as the rising threat of Saruman. The king was no longer able to rule his own kingdom, and at the height of his tragedy, his only son Theodred, the last chance for the second royal line of Eorl, is killed at the Battle of the Fords of Isen. While filled with rage at the death of his best friend and brother, Éomer went against the direct orders of Edoras and pursued an orc raid into Rohan, which prompted the arrest and imprisonment of the 3rd Marshal of the Mark by the orders of Wormtongue, at what was the culmination of Saruman's corruption on the king's mind and soul, as well as the peak of his influence in the realm. It is at this state that Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli arrive in Edoras. With the help of Gandalf the White's newfound strength and power, he is able to overcome the fog of Saruman and banish him from Théoden's soul, allowing him to begin the journey of reclaiming himself. With the imminent invasion of the kingdom, he finally takes back the mantle of leadership and banishes Grima. He leads his people to the Hornburg, the fortress where his forefathers too had fought for the very survival of the realm and had persevered. At the Battle of the Hornburg, at Helm's Deep, the king leads his people to victory and destroys the army of Isengard, the first milestone of his journey of redemption that would culminate outside the gates of Minas Tirith. When Denethor called upon the sacred oath of Eorl and lit the beacons of Minas Tirith and sent the red arrow to Théoden, the king of the Mark immediately set course for the White City, praying to be fast enough to reach it before it too falls to the shadow of Mordor. Every single moment in his life had led to this. Every struggle, every disappointment, every glory received, and every time he had been kicked into the mud by those he trusted most. This was his time. For his beloved sister, for his wife, for his fallen son, for all of the sons and daughters of Rohan that had fallen to protect their homes. This was his time to make them proud, to finally be worthy of his name, to be worthy of his throne and a worthy son of Rohan. Where for so long he had been the indirect cause of his kingdom's tragic state, it was now his opportunity to redeem himself for what he feels is his fault, for trusting Wormtongue, for the death of Theodred, the arrest of Éomer, for the invasion of Isengard. This was his time. He arrives at the Minas Tirith in agony, the White City on the brink of doom. He is disheartened at first, but he does not cower, he does not retreat. He could have led his army away and salvaged what he could. He could have returned to Rohan and hid, and maybe even made an alliance with Sauron to save himself and the kingdom. under the banner of the lidless eye. He did not.
And then as the darkness closed again, there came rolling over the fields a great boom. At that sound the bent shape of the king sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and rising in his stirrups he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before, "Arise, arise, riders of Théoden! Fell leads awake fire and slaughter! Spear shall be shaken, shield be splintered, sword day, red day, ere the sun rises! Ride now, ride to Gondor!" With that he seized a great horn from Guzlaf his banner-bearer, and he blew such a blast upon it that it burst asunder. And straightway all the horns in the host were lifted up in music, and the blowing of the horns of Rohan in that hour was like a storm upon the plain, and a thunder in the mountains. Ride now, ride to Gondor! Suddenly the king cried to Snowmane, and the horse sprang away. Behind him his banner blew in the wind, white horse on a field of green, but he outpaced it. After him thundered the knights of his house, but he was ever before them. Eomer rode there, the white horse tail on his helm floating in his speed, and the front of the first Eored roared like a breaker foaming to the shore, but Théoden could not be overtaken. Fey he seemed, nor the battle fury of his fathers ran like new fire in his veins, and he was borne upon Snowmane like a god of old, even as Orome the Great in the battle of the Valar when the world was young.
For the longest time he had not been the king he so desperately wanted to be. He feared above all else of not being worthy of his forefathers, and when he gets the opportunity to prove himself and save his kingdom, Gondor, and by extension the entirety of Middle-earth, he grabs it and gives everything he's got. Everything. Because anything less would not be worthy of his story. It would not be worthy of Théoden King and the philosophy of his tale, a tale of sacrifice. The king exists to serve. He is there to guide his people and to protect them, and to above all shield them from darkness, spiritually and physically. Théoden did just that. At the glory of his people, at the greatest time of his reign, and at the height of his redemption, Théoden had to die. His death marked the culmination of his redemption, and in a literary sense, provided a satisfying but nonetheless emotionally heartbreaking conclusion to a character that was finally able to break down the shackles that had oppressed him for so long. Not only that, but through his death, he was finally worthy of his fathers, and would go down in legend forever. Théoden the Renewed. Is this the only reason Tolkien chose to have Théoden killed at the peak of his glory? Of course not. Nothing is ever as simple within the Lord of the Rings. Consider the impact of Théoden's death on Éowyn. Theoden's injury and later death is what pushed Éowyn's metamorphosis to its absolute conclusion and ended her arc. It is what pushed her to defend him and fight the Witch King, and once she does and kills him, it is through this that she realizes her true purpose is not the path of the warrior, but that of the healer. And more so than Éowyn, look at what Theoden's death means for Éomer. Where he lost a father, he had gained a crown, though not all that glitters is gold. What he actually gained was a new responsibility, a new sense of purpose, a new star to guide him for the rest of his life. He was now king. He was the founder of a new dynasty within the House of Earl. The old guard of the kingdom was gone. It is he and his peers that had survived the onslaught that constituted the future of Rohan into the Fourth Age and beyond. Theoden's death completes his arc, and his sacrifice, and his purpose. And it gives a renewed purpose to those closest to him. And it is this that makes this tragedy so important. His death is the ultimate act of bravery and sacrifice. Théoden King paid the ultimate price for the sake of the ultimate prize in the world. Not merely the glory of his name in the memory of men, but the safety of his loved ones and the triumph of good over evil. Finally, through the demise of Théoden, we see yet another way in which Tolkien highlights what he himself has said the story is truly, above all else, about life and death. The fact that the king managed to overcome the darkness placed by Saruman on his very soul, and that he regained the flame within him, the flame imperishable, to fight for his people and do his duty, does not mean that he is immortal, or that he is entitled to something not meant for him. The gift of men, after all, is to die. For some, it is in their own bed, for others by accident or sickness, and for these warriors, it was in battle that they would receive their gift of death. It is unavoidable. It is a fate one must accept, and then everything else follows after that. Such is life, after all. Nonetheless, not only despite, but perhaps even because of his death, Théoden still finds a way to perform good for the world, through what he comes to represent. He stands in opposition to the darkness. He shows that even when you have fallen to the shadow, or you have sinned, or you have lost your way, and you have seemingly failed at your purpose, you can always redeem yourself. You can always perform goodness for the world. Yes, there was doubt. There was uncertainty, and he did not know what the fate of the Ride of the Rohirrim would ultimately be, or if the might of Mordor could ever be toppled, or the ring destroyed. He charged anyway, and in his glory he fell, And through his fall, his deeds grew to a proportion that rivaled the legends of the gods of old. And through his death, he still managed to give light to others. And he faced his fall with grace and bravery. And he accepted the gift of men with gratitude. And he traveled to the halls of Mandos. And in the end, he went into the embrace of Ilúvatar. And he was fulfilled. Thank you very much for watching.